Hi, Andy. Welcome to the show.
Hi, John. I'm pleased to be on it. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I've been doing a lot of reading about who you are, and you've led quite an interesting life, and we're going to get right to that. But, I just want to mention that you're in Toronto.
Yes, I am. I work with a group called Pace Law Firm. I work in the area of immigration, doing US and Canadian immigration. But I think we're going to be talking mainly about my writing.
Hmm.
I write for Forbes. I've been writing for Forbes for 10 years now, columns on the immigration question.
Yeah.
And also, I've written several books that I believe we'll be talking about.
Oh, yeah. Looking forward to that. But why don't you give us a little bit of backstory? What's your history? We know you're a lawyer in Toronto, but there's so much more to you. I'd like to learn about that and how you got to the point where you said to yourself, I'm going to write books.
Okay. Well, a good place to start is where I went to university. I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, and half my life was in Canada, the other half in the United States. I grew up under my mother's care. My father died when I was 9 years old, so my mother looked after me. And she had a sister in Los Angeles, and I used to go back and forth to my aunt Helen and to my mother, over the years. So half my life I spent in Canada, the other half in the United States. The same was true with my law practice. I practiced in Los Angeles and New York and so on later on in life. But about writing, let me just share this story. I went to university in Vancouver at UBC. And in first year university, I took English 101, which was a required course. Well, I wasn't doing very well in English. In fact, I barely made it through that class. I think probably the professor took pity on me at the end of the year and gave me a passing mark, and only because he knew if I didn't pass English 101, I couldn't continue in my
My goodness.
university studies.
Oh,
So uh, if he knew what I'm doing today, he would probably roll over in his grave that I'm writing for Forbes, that I'm writing these books, etc.
yeah.
And initially, I thought, apart from my career as a lawyer and doing immigration work, I thought, I'm going to cultivate my speaking skills, my public speaking skills. And I think you might see actually over my shoulder, just up over here, there's a plaque up on the wall. And that's a plaque from Toastmasters International.
Hmm.
And if you know about them, you'll
I
know
do.
that it's a speaking organization, an organization that cultivates public speaking and leadership. And I rose over the course of 35 years. I attended Toastmasters meetings once a week with a club where we cultivated public speaking, and someone would speak, and then the others would give him a critique of what they said in these club meetings. So for 35 years, I attended Toastmaster club meetings, and I rose to the top of the Toastmasters organization and became a distinguished Toastmaster, is what they call it.
Wow.
But what I wanted to say was I found that the world didn't want me to be a speaker. The world seemed to want me to be a writer.
Mm.
And, I wrote some articles and I published articles, and, I just from day to day, I wrote here and there and so on, to the point where I rose in the writing world to become a journalist. And I wrote for a group called Southam News Services, which had a series of newspapers across Canada. And I ended up at the United Nations as a UN correspondent for 2 years, actually.
There you go.
And so after that, that was in the 70s, I went back into the legal career. And a strange thing happened to me, something that never happened to me in my life except for this one occasion.
Hmm.
All my life, I had to work for everything. I was always, if I applied for work or a position or anything, it was always, you're too late, you're too early, you're too educated, you're not educated enough, you're too fat, you're too skinny, you're too tall. Never, oh, we've been waiting for you. Come on in, Andy. Where have you been all this? Never.
Yeah.
But this one time happened, which is I wrote comments, and a colleague of mine, Sean Barry, who helps me in terms of looking after social media, helped me post comments on immigration articles from time to time on the internet. And one day I got an email from Forbes, and they said, "Hey, would you be interested in writing for Forbes on immigration? We see that you were a former UN correspondent." And would I? Of course I would. And that was 10 years ago. And from writing articles in time, I thought, gee, I've got something inside me that's burning, like there's an aching need to share my thoughts, what I have inside me. And I started writing books, and I've written 4. So here I am with you.
I like stories like this. I ask everybody I talk to, I ask, tell me a bit of a story. And regardless of how they got to the point, when they get to the point, they feel like, I've got to write this book. I've got to share this. It's a compelling feeling inside. So join the club. Now you're one
Yeah.
of us.
I
Excellent.
know you wrote a memoir, so it was probably inside you, and you told me
Yeah.
you published 7 books.
And
So that
then I had a story to tell about
together.
my life, and I wanted to tell it in a trilogy, and that's turning into a 5-book series, but without talking about me, just making up fictional characters that tells a story in a more exaggerated way about what I went through. So,
Yeah, yeah.
because I was tired of hearing my own voice.
I
So,
don't know if you ever encountered this idea of emotional truth versus actual truth.
I've heard.
The concept being through novels, you
Mhm.
can share an emotional truth that
Yes,
may be deeper than any actual truth that you might share from your life.
absolutely. Yeah.
Uh,
My first reason for writing fiction was because I wanted to tell my story, but my story is kind of boring and it's very personal to me, and who would be interested? So I thought, well, I'll exaggerate in a fictional sense and I'll get the emotional truth out. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's what I did. Now, you, being a lawyer, have written some interesting books on subjects that I would never associate with being a lawyer. Like, for instance, your book, Solomea.
Right, right. It's a book about my great aunt, who was a prominent opera star in the golden age of opera. In fact, she rose from obscurity to world fame in the golden age of opera, and she was the leading soprano in the first decade of the 1900s. If you're familiar with opera, you may know a name like Maria Callas or Pavarotti. Those are singers in today's world that are known. Solomea Krushelnicka, my aunt, was the Maria Callas of her generation, previous to the Maria Callas of our day. And she traveled all over the world. She knew 8 languages. She knew 60 operas, both the lyrics and the music by heart. She traveled all over Europe, North Africa, South America, North America. And she was in Canada, for example. She performed in Montreal and in Winnipeg. She was in the United States. She performed in New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, in Buenos Aires, in Chile and Uruguay and all over Europe.
Wow.
But a reason why I wrote this book about this opera star is because of the way she rose to fame and the struggle that she had to go through to reach the heights in her calling. Now, some of the listeners on your podcast may not be opera fans, maybe most of them aren't or don't know much about opera. And I appreciate that. So I just want to share why it is that this book meant so much to me, and perhaps it might mean something to the listeners. And that's because in our world, to get somewhere, you can't just wander around and just kind of hope that, from day to day, if you do well, maybe you'll get lucky and become president of General Motors. That's not the way it works. You have to work hard. You have to dedicate yourself to something. And I believe the starting point is to ask, what is your unique ability? What are you so good at that you love to do it and you're better than most people at doing it? And in her case, when she was young, her father asked her, well, what do you want to do with your life? And she said, I love to sing. I love to sing. I want to sing. And he said, well, in that case, we have to sign you up for opera school. And they signed her up for a local opera school and then off to Milan, the center of opera in the world at the time, at La Scala, the central opera theater in the world. And she studied in Milan under one of the best opera teachers. And over time, she rose in her career. I mean, there's a lot to her story, but I just briefly, it cost money to study. And
Yeah.
she, it was just tight. The money was tight. The family, there was 8 people in the family. The father was a priest, a Ukrainian Catholic priest who had a family they could marry in that tradition. But he couldn't support everybody and, send someone to opera school. So money was tight. And the teacher said to her, well, look, there's La Scala, and then there's kind of like off Broadway. There's Broadway in New York, and then there's off Broadway. And maybe you don't rise right away to Broadway. You're not a Broadway star on day one. You first show up off Broadway, get a part, get another part, and so on, and make your way onto Broadway. Well, in those days, it was La Scala, but near La Scala, there were all kinds of regional theaters and performances. And she, like her teacher said, go and try out on some of these regional theaters. And she did. And to her great fortune, she got a part in a premiere of opera that was written by Giacomo Puccini. And Puccini was one of the world's greatest opera composers.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them.
And what happened was Man and Lescaut was the name of the opera.
Okay.
And she got the role. And one day, Puccini shows up while she's rehearsing. And she doesn't know who he is. And he goes, after she stops, he comes up to her and he says, okay, now we start working. And she says, working? What do you mean working? And he says, we're going to have to rehearse. He says, well, she says, I am rehearsing. And he says, no, I have in mind really serious work now. And she says, well, what do you mean? Well, I have a person I want you to work under, and I want him to teach you how to perform this role. And it was one of the best conductors in the opera world. And she learned from them, and she performed in that opera. And from there, she developed a friendship with Puccini that lasted a lifetime. That's how she rose up into the opera world.
Right.
And over time, over a course of 10, 15 years, she rose to the top of her career. And just then, and this is all in the book, by the way, just then, Puccini was looking for a new opera to put on. And he noticed this story about a girl named Chiyo Chiyo-san, a Japanese geisha girl, who fell in love with an American naval officer who had come to Japan to open up Japan. And this story was Madame Butterfly, the opera Madame Butterfly. So he decided he's going to stage it. But he didn't ask Solomea to perform. He asked someone else, a lady named Rosanna Storchio, and a guy named Genatello. And they performed it at La Scala. The premiere was at La Scala, but it turned out to be a catastrophe. The audience whistled and booed it down. They barely got through the opera. Wow. And they shut the run down. Next day in the papers, Puccini lays a bomb, opera disaster, etc. Headlines. Wow. And Puccini was crestfallen because he loved the opera that he had just composed. He went to his friend, a guy named Arturo Toscanini, who was by far the greatest conductor of the day then. Toscanini later became the conductor of the NBC Orchestra in New York later. But back then he's in Milan. And Puccini went to him and said, look, I love this opera, but, you know, it was a catastrophe when we, you know, what do I do? And Toscanini said, look, if you want to resurrect this opera, there's only one lady who can do it. And that's Solomea Rushenetska. Go to her. Now, this is like asking Julia Roberts to perform in an opera that just bombed starring Sandra Bullock.
Okay.
You know, would you do it? So he goes to her. He says, look, Solomea, I want to put this opera on. I don't know. You have to help me. And because they were friends, she said, okay, I'll do it. And they rehearsed together and in a place called Brescia, just 60 miles east of Milan, in the Teatro Grande. They rehearsed and they staged the opera there. To prepare for the opera and to prepare for the lead role of Chiyo-san, which is butterfly in Japanese.
Okay.
To prepare for that role, she wore a Japanese kimono for 2 months just to sink into the role. And it was a challenge because she was in her 30s and she had to perform play the role of a girl who was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
But she did it. Now, a little bit about the opera, a minute on the opera. The opera is about this Chiyo-san who falls in love with this guy named Pinkerton, an American naval officer. They have a romantic relationship, and then he announces he has to leave because he's got to go back to America. But he promises her, I'll come back. And she says, okay. And she waits for him. In the meantime, she gives birth to his son. And it's a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And finally, he returns back to Japan, but with an American wife in tow. And there's a crisis between the family, between the Pinkerton and Chiyo-san. What do we do with the son? Does he stay with a geisha girl and live in Japan? Or does he go to America with his father? And they decide to send him off to America with his father. And in one of the final scenes of the opera, Chiyo-san pulls the little boy off to the side, and she says the following to the boy. She says, look at this face. It is the face of your mother. Remember it. You will never see it again. And then bids goodbye to the boy as he goes off with the father. And then later she commits suicide. It's a very sad, sad opera.
Yeah.
But it's striking. And it's one of the most popular operas to this day. In fact, today, it's 120 years. It's the 120th anniversary of the opera, Madame Butterfly. It's going to be performed in Toronto in January. Madame Butterfly will be performed in Toronto.
Yeah.
So that's a story of how she helped resurrect the opera Madame Butterfly. And there's more about her in the book.
Nice cover too. I guess that's a picture of her. Has it been colorized? Has been treated?
Yes, yes. It's she's in one of the operas, and it's a picture of her in her lead role.
Yeah. And how did you do the research to get all the details of her life? I guess you were told stories when you were young, but you must have gone deeper some other way.
Yes, I did. There's a museum dedicated to her life in Lviv in Western Ukraine. And they helped me completely. They opened their doors and their archives and everything in the museum to me to be able to write this book. In addition, I had family members. My mother, for example, lived with her during the war, during World War II, in the darkest days of the war, as did my grandmother, my grandfather, and my Aunt Helen, who I mentioned earlier in the program in Los Angeles. So I learned from them about her life. And of course, I read everything there was about her life, spoke to opera people who know the history and all that. So that's how I researched it. Yeah, it took 10 years.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
yeah.
So when did you start?
Let's see, go back about 12 years, 11 years ago, and that would be whatever that is.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you this, over 100 people contributed to this book, editing and so on.
Yeah.
My wife, God bless her, read this book 15 times to edit it for mistakes, errors, and so on. 15 times. Just
Yes.
her. Yeah. It
Did
takes a
you,
lot.
did you send it out to get it edited after that, though?
Professional editors.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I'll bet you any money that's what you did with your books.
To some extent, yes, yes. I discovered a new technique actually just this past year that when
Oh,
I'm getting ready to send it out to the editor, I have Microsoft read it back to me.
oh,
And for the reason that I guess there must be a psychological word for this. Uh, if there's little words missing, like in, as, of, it, that kind of thing,
yeah.
that our eyes just fill it in. But
Oh,
when you have it read back to you, that computer voice is just going to say what's on that page, and then you'll hear that it's missing a of or in.
oh, wow. I'll have
Yeah,
to try that.
yeah,
This book is an audio book as well. It's all on Amazon. All my books are on Amazon.
cool, very good.
Yeah.
Now you use a different first name.
Yeah.
You want to explain why you're called Andy, but there's spelled a different way?
Andri, yeah. Andri is sort of like, if to draw an analogy, William and Bill.
Hmm.
I go by Andy, like on a working level. Andri is my formal name.
Okay,
And it's because, I'm Ukrainian in background, and people have a hard time with Andri.
sure.
Uh,
Yeah, I can relate to that.
yeah.
And how long is this book? Is it a full novel?
Well, it's over 400 pages. Actually,
It's a
it's
full novel.
450 pages.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'm not completely ignorant to opera or that kind of music. My
Mhm.
father was highly educated. He was a architect, and we went to Place des Arts in Montreal. And I was a little boy. I had my clip-on bow tie and everything, and I behaved well. And I sat there mesmerized by the symphony orchestra or opera, just mesmerized me. Ballet made me feel a little awkward. Didn't know why they were all dancing around like that, but that's how I grew up. My father just exposed me to all that stuff, and I think
Yeah.
that had something to do with me wanting to be a musician.
Well, yeah, because I see all these musical instruments behind you there, so I could see you had a strain of interest in that area.
My father was very supportive of my music up until the point where I said I want to make it a living, and then he got concerned that, that may not work out.
I'm trying to do something with guitar, but it's not going very well.
Mm,
But one of these days, I sometime in the future, maybe one day I'll be a mariachi guitar player. I like
okay.
mariachi bands, the
Yeah.
Mexican
Yeah.
mariachi. I wouldn't mind being a part of a group like that.
Yeah. Cool. Now let's see. I'm gonna shift this page over here, and maybe we'll talk about a book. Yeah, here. A Promise Kept. What's that all about?
Okay, this is a story of my mother's life, and it kind of intertwines with Solomea's life because during the war, World War II, they lived together in Lviv, which is in Western Ukraine, in an apartment that Solomea bought. She had a house in Lviv, like an apartment building, actually. And uh, during the Nazi occupation, for example, they lived in one apartment together, my whole family and Solomea. And then when the Soviets came, they were together in an apartment as well. But briefly, my mother was born in Western Ukraine under Austro-Hungarian rule. When she was young, at 2 years old, she caught meningitis and she lost the hearing in her left ear. And then at 12, she caught Spanish flu, and it took away her hearing in the right ear, except for 20% of the right ear. So at the age of 12, she was pretty much deaf, and she had to grow up and make something of her life. It was a hard life, very hard life.
Yeah.
She grew up to be a seamstress and a costume designer. In fact, she worked in Warsaw in the opera, sewing costumes like this costume of Solomea's, for the various opera stars and so on. So during the war, it was, as I mentioned already, hard times. They're living together in tight quarters. Actually, during the war, when the Nazis were occupying Western Ukraine, they took over the building, and my grandfather went with Solomea to the German High Command because they wanted to install the military in the building because of the three-story building. And they said, well, wait a minute, this is Solomea's building. Where are we going to live if you're going to take over the building? And they negotiated with the German High Command, and they said, okay, you can have the top floor, one apartment on the top floor, but we're taking over the rest of the building. So they lived above on the top floor, third floor, on a building where the whole building was full of German army officers and men, but they had the right to live on the top floor there. And it was tense times. The Holocaust, the Shoah took place at that. Now, we weren't Jewish. Our family is Ukrainian in background, but nonetheless, they saw what was going on the streets there and throughout all of Poland and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So some hardships there, but I'll just briefly say that when the war was coming to an end and the Red Army was coming in and moving forward onto Germany, my family had to make a decision. Do they stay or do they go?
Yeah.
And my family lost my uncle, who was taken by the NKVD secret police, imprisoned and shot. So my grandfather said, well, we're leaving. We have to leave. We're not going to fall under the Soviets again. And so they escaped. My mother, my aunt, and my grandfather and grandmother. Along the way, my grandfather got sick with pneumonia and died. And the grandmother stayed with where he was buried. But my mother headed westward along with my aunt. And my mother ended up in a displaced persons camp in Salzburg, Austria, as did my aunt. And eventually my mother emigrated to Canada, sponsored by a farmer who wrote a letter saying, listen, I need someone. My wife passed away and I have some children here and I need someone to come and help me. And that letter got to her and she agreed to come to Alberta, to Park Court, Alberta. And that's where she arrived in 1948. Now, Park Court, Alberta is not the end of the world, but you can almost see the end of the world from Park Court. It's like in the middle of nowhere.
Okay.
And that was okay, like in the summer, but in the winter when the snow was 6 feet high and they lived in a one room kind of farmhouse. Now, to her surprise, he had 5 children. And no electricity, no water, a tough life there.
Yeah.
And she's kind of a city girl. She wasn't like out on the farms much, but she had to, make a go of it with him. Actually, the story there is they came to Alberta before the war, and he got a parcel of land and he started farming, and they had these children, 5 children. And one day the mother got sick. She bent over with pain in the stomach. And they were like 60 miles from Edmonton, in the middle of nowhere. And they rushed to they're trying to get a car, but there was only one car in the town, and the guy who owned the car wasn't there. So they teamed up some horses, and on a carriage, they were riding first to Evansburg, which is a town just not far from Parkport, and then along the highway out to Edmonton, 60 miles rushing. When they got to Evansburg, they saw a doctor. The doctor said, "This woman is sick. She's got to be in a hospital right away. You got to take her to Alberta, to Edmonton." And so they're rushing to Edmonton. The guy who owned the car was found, and he caught up to them. They transferred her into the car, rushed her to the hospital. She got to the University of Alberta Hospital, and she had a pancreas, a bursting pancreas.
Yeah.
Killed her. She died. And so my father, he turned out to be my father later, ended up with 5 kids on the farm, no wife, and he didn't know how to cook. He never cooked an egg, even nothing.
Yeah.
So he needed someone, and he rode away to the camps, hoping some lady, some woman would be willing to come out, and that's where my mother came along. And I mean, there's more to that story, but that's the basic gist of it.
Yeah. Yeah. My parents told me many stories about the old country. And yes, they escaped in 1956. My mother was pregnant with me, and I was born in Belgium because that's where we ended up.
Yeah.
But they tried in 1951, and they didn't make it. They got caught, and they were punished. My father was sentenced to 8 years in prison. My mother was sent to a mental institution. She only
This
spent
was in Hungary, right?
in Hungary in 1951. It was illegal to leave a communist
Yes,
country.
yes, it was. Yeah.
So there was only one corridor, and that was into Austria, a very small corridor, and they got caught. So they had to pay the price, and they were both tortured, and my father was in prison, and it was not very good. It wasn't like a Canadian prison, I'm sure.
Right.
I
Right.
kept hearing stories over and over again, and that, and of course the World War II when they were just children, they were
Yeah.
teenagers, so they had a lot to say about that. So when I hear your stories, though, mine are very
And they
different.
pop up right away, though, like the
Yeah.
similar in
I
terms of
remember.
tragedy and
Yeah, that
you
was
know,
the kitchen table talk. So
yeah,
often. Yeah.
yeah.
Fascinating. Is that a picture of you she's holding a hand of?
Yes, yes, that's me walking with her on the street in Edmonton.
I have a very similar picture. My mother
Have
was
you?
dressed something like that, holding my hand, and we're walking somewhere. Yeah,
I told you we have very parallel lives.
wild. It's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Wow.
So let's move on to another book of yours. Ah, here, a treasure chest of humor.
Ah, yes.
You told me you have a joke.
Yes. I'll tell you my favorite joke. There's a lot of them in there, but my favorite joke is this one. A woman went to a pet shop and she saw a parrot and she thought, oh, I'll buy this parrot and teach it to talk. So she took it home and she thought, what should I teach this parrot? There are people coming all the time, so she thought she would teach him, whenever someone knocked on the door, teach him, who is it? So if someone knocked, who is it? Who is it? So she taught him how to say, who is it? And one day she had to go get some groceries and she left the parrot alone. And just after she left, a guy came to the door, knocked on the door, and the parrot said, who is it? And the guy says, it's the plumber. And the parrot says, who is it? And the guy says, it's the plumber. And the parrot says, who is it? And it's the plumber. And the guy gets so exasperated that he collapses on the doorstep. And just then the wife comes home and she sees this guy lying on the doorstep. And she looks over and she says, oh my goodness, I wonder who is it? And the parrot says, it's the plumber. I love that joke.
That's good. You want to hear my parrot joke?
Yeah, yeah. I
All right.
love parrot jokes. Love them.
Okay. So there was a woman had 3 sons, and it was very successful in raising them. They turned out to be very successful businessmen of various sorts, and they got together as adult men. They said, our mother's getting old, and we should. She was such a great mother. We should do something for her. And they made good money. So one of them says, I'm going to buy her a nice house to live in. That's a good idea. And the other one said, I'm going to get a chauffeur-driven limousine so she doesn't have to worry about how to get around. She just goes down there and she can just go anywhere she wants. And she could be mobile. Oh, that's very nice. What are you going to get her? They asked the third guy. Says, well, there's a special parrot and it's highly trained. And you know, our mother's very religious. She loves the Bible and she likes, learning about God. Well, this parrot has memorized every single biblical verse there is. And all you have to do is say the verse, verse and chapter, and the parrot will say it. Oh, what a great gift. So that he gave her that. About a month later, they talked to their mother, and the mother calls them up, each of her sons, and she thanks the guy, who bought her a house, a nice house, very nice house, and the chauffeur-driven limousine. She loves that too. And for the third son, she writes back and says, son, I love the gift you gave me. The chicken was delicious.
That's cute.
Okay. I don't know what it is with parrot jokes, but they're funny.
Yeah.
So this book, Treasure Chest of Humor, I guess it's just a bunch of jokes. Is that what it is?
Yeah, like I learned I was a stand-up comic for a while, performing in Los Angeles and in Toronto here too at Yuck Yucks. And I learned from other comics that if you've got a good joke, and not every joke is fantastic, there's some jokes just are natural. They pull out, people laugh. So you got to treasure those jokes. When you find a good joke, you got to keep it.
Mhm.
So I was keeping my list of good jokes, and I thought, gee, when I go, nobody will know these jokes. So I thought I'll put them in a book. And so I put them in that book there. And so if someone needs some humor, they can turn to the book and they'll find
Okay.
it there.
Well, you've been all around. You've done all kinds of very serious things and a lot of fun things, a full, rich life. Boy,
Sure,
not too
sure.
many people could say that. When did you write this book?
Well, the jokes were acquired over like 10, 15 years. I came out, actually, I don't remember exactly the year, but let me have a look here. Well, put it this way, it's about 5 years ago. It came
Mhm.
out in, 2018 is when it came out.
Yeah. Did you do any writing during the pandemic? I guess you must have been self-isolating like the rest of us.
Well, that's when the Solomea, I spent a lot of time on Solomea during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And how is it published? Through yourself or you got a publisher?
Solomea was published through Amazon Kindle, that group,
Yeah.
KDP. Some of my books have been, there's a group called Cengage Learning. So my book, The Young Professional, was published by them. But the others were published through Amazon,
Okay.
basically, the KDP version.
Now, being that you're Canadian, we have a privilege here in Canada. We don't have to pay for ISBN numbers. Did you use the ISBN that was given to you through Amazon, or did you get your own from the government?
I got it myself.
Yeah, that's the best way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I found
It's
that
not a big thing. You just write for it.
it's very simple, very simple. I asked for 20 of them and I got it. So there you
Yeah.
go.
ISBN is just a number that you get for every book so that people can follow the book. Like the publishing world follows ISBN numbers.
Right, right. Well, there's something about trying to stay away from the Amazon Kindle appointed ISBN numbers. I don't know the technical reason, but a publicist once explained it to me and got me convinced that, don't use those ISBNs. I guess you lose some of your rights as the original.
Oh, could be.
Something like that. Yeah. Not the greatest business, man. Now you have other books. Let me just pull that up here if you feel like talking about it. If not,
Well,
that's okay.
the only other book I should probably mention is this The Young
Yes.
Professional, which is a
Right.
kind of a career guidebook for young people.
Okay. And when did you write that?
That was a long time ago. That book was published by Cengage, as I mentioned, and it came out long before Solomea. So this is about, let's see, I'll just look. It's 2014 is when it was published. And basically the theme of that book is, I've been practicing law for, decades now, helping a lot of young people, professional people in particular. And I noticed three kind of problems that most people have, young people in particular. And the three are money, time, and balance. So I wrote a book about those problems and how to address them. And that's what's in the book.
I'm only 67, and I say that because I have a feeling that you're probably 2 years older than me or so.
A few years older than
Okay.
you.
But still, I started noticing in the 90s that whatever opportunities I had back in the 70s, the young assistant editors that I was working with didn't seem to have those same opportunities.
Yeah.
It was easy for me to buy a house and get a career, but
Yeah.
that's not the case. That's not the case anymore.
Comparatively speaking, it's difficult now. Yeah.
Yeah. How does this book help a young person?
Well, I'll just give an example. You're talking about money, so let's talk about money. In my view, unless you're like the son of someone like Musk, Elon Musk, where you're going to inherit $240 billion, or you win a lottery, you're in the boat like you and I, which is you have to come up with something that the world wants. And the key to it is to find your unique ability. What's burning inside you that wants to get out, that you can work with and bring to the marketplace, and the marketplace will buy it. I talked earlier about how I spent 35 years learning how to speak, but the marketplace didn't want to hear me speak until now. Now I'm speaking like with you.
Yeah.
And it's helpful. And now I have a role for the speaking part. But the marketplace wanted me to write. That's where I got, that's where it would pay for what I do through Forbes and through the books.
Yeah.
So you have to find what's your unique ability and put it in the service of others. And I believe we all of us have a unique ability, or two, maybe, or three, but just a few things that you do really well. One day I went to a Chinese restaurant for dinner. I got a Chinese cookie. I opened it up and it says, do one thing really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
That Chinese cookie summarizes
Yeah,
how to make money.
for sure.
Do one thing really, really well,
Yeah.
and the world will come to you.
You mentioned transferable skills in your book.
Yes,
I
a
think that's
bit.
important. I think that's important because you may do something really, really well, but then through a process of transition to something else, you realize that you're using those skills for something completely different, and yet you're getting the same result. You're getting, like, I
Right.
never thought I'd be a television editor. I wanted to be a musician, but
Right.
boy, did I ever really enjoy editing television shows.
Yeah. That's a good point that you're making. It's a valuable point to know,
Yeah.
that you don't know where the world is going to take you,
Mhm.
but you can learn a lot of things that will carry along with you and apply them. So,
Yeah.
for example, in my own career, I'm an immigration lawyer, but if you ask me, well, what part of immigration do you like the best? The part I like best is the writing part, and meeting with clients and talking with clients to be clear on what I'm saying, and to make the most difference because of the clarity of my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So my writing has helped me. If I drew a large circle, which represents my career in immigration, and I drew a smaller circle, that smaller circle is the area that I'm really good at, that that's my unique ability.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can focus on the larger circle, or I can focus on the smaller circle. If I focus on the smaller circle, it will grow. If I focus on the larger circle, it will grow, but my smaller circle will shrink.
Right.
So I decided in my career, I'm going to focus on the smaller circle and make it a larger part of my career.
Right.
And in that way, I've been more successful in my role as an immigration lawyer.
Very good. Okay, now you have a website. Actually, you have several websites, but the link you sent me when we first were communicating was to one called Pace Law.
Right, pacelawfirm.com. That's where I work here in Toronto. if you want to reach me, that's where you can reach me. Yeah.
There's so many links here and there's so many pull down menus. I'm not going to ask you to describe everything that's on there, but
Not
if people want
necessary.
to contact you for the reason of law, that's where they will see that. And of
Or
course,
any
I'll have
reason.
that in the description below in this video.
Sure.
But you also have another one here called myworkvisa.com.
Right.
Okay.
That's more about me as a person, what I do. It includes my books. There's a link there, my books, so you can find my books there. But you can find them on Amazon if you're looking for my books. Amazon is where you can look.
Okay.
But I have some articles and stuff that I've posted there if you're interested in reading any articles or anything, anything to do with immigration as well as there.
Okay. Excellent. Well, that'll also be in the description of this video.
Great.
Well, I usually ask a question about how are your books selling and how does that end of the business end of it? What's that like?
Well, this book, Solomea, has sold out in its first printing. It's in a second printing. I'm moving along in that. I've had book signings. Right now, for example, I have 3 book signings scheduled. One in Toronto this Sunday, one in Miami, Florida on November 6th, and one in Ottawa on November 20th. So
Okay.
I'm promoting it in that way.
Okay.
The other books are selling as well. Look, I learned long ago, you're not going to become a millionaire from selling books.
No.
Unless you're some kind of a freak or, celebrity of some kind or whatever.
It can happen, but it's like a lottery.
Right. Books serve a good purpose. For one thing, you are able to share your life with other people. You learn a lot from the books. You can be invited to speak, for example, things of this nature. But books alone, it's rare for a book to really hit the multi-million-dollar category. So I'm not
Absolutely.
an expert.
I went from writing songs, which is simple enough to listen to a 4.5-minute song that I wrote that's up online somewhere.
Right.
Whole different matter about trying to get someone to read my 300-page novel.
Yeah, it's hard.
I think the best thing to do is be a painter. Do a painting, have it hanging in your somewhere, and people just look at it and go, "Oh, I really like that." 15 seconds later, they've experienced it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Communication-wise, that's the best, probably.
Yeah. Well, Andy, it's been a pleasure talking with you and having connection with Toronto again. I spoke with somebody from Toronto yesterday. This is 2 days in a row I'm speaking to people from Toronto. I should go back and visit sometime.
John, I'm very grateful to you because you've covered all my books. You're the only one that I've been on podcast-wise that has covered all my books.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I wish you well in the future. And if you ever write anything else and you want to get back on the show, I love repeat guests. So
okay,
keep it in mind.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you take care of yourself now.
You too. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, and if you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then I invite you to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment if you wish. And if you are an author, I would sure love to hear from you. Until such time, keep on writing, and remember to be kind to one another.